Okay, I'm going to continue with my autobiography, 7 Years to Life, and we're on chapter 4, and the title of this chapter is Miracle on 44th Street. Roller skates played a big part in the story of John Boy, and they also play a very important role in this story. The apartments that I resided in with my mom were little communities in themselves. They were 7 stories high and covered a total of 3 square city blocks. You entered your apartment through a number of archways that led to the interior lawns that were bisected by paved paths that led to a number of doors that contained different addresses. The reason that I describe these apartments is to give you an idea of just how many families lived in them. There were many children of different age groups, and in most instances, the kids hung out with those other kids in their particular age group. I believe the year was 1958, and looking back at that year, what strikes me the most is how we discovered different ways to entertain ourselves. Remember, television had not existed for a very long time, and it was broadcast only in black and white, and I think there was a total of 7 stations. There were no PlayStations, Xboxes, or smartphones to keep us entertained, so we had to be very creative about the things we did together. In those days, children created their fun by being socially active and through face-to-face discussion of ideas that seemed entertaining. I feel it was significantly more beneficial to communicate that way rather than the way we communicate in the technological world of today. I can't remember who it was that came up with the idea of street derby, but you can imagine by its name that it was patterned loosely on roller derby. We typically played street derby in the hot, humid summertime when we were out of school. Many of the streets in Woodside, which was where I lived, are not made of the same materials that streets are made with today. They were made, and to my best estimation, of a material incredibly similar to tar. In fact, it may have been tar. There were times on really hot days that when you looked down at the street, you could see these tiny tar bubbles. The surface of the street was ideal for the roller skates of that era and the game of street derby. Additionally, the surface was perfect for drawing with chalk the necessary boundary lines for street derby. We would take our chalk and draw a large oblong circle on the street. We would then, on the outside of that drawn circle, we would draw another line that followed the contour of the original line. This created a lane in which we could skate. We also created a couple of other lanes that crossed from one side of the circle to the other. They were called takeout lanes. You could use these lanes to cut across the circle and force your opponent out of bounds. Two people would be chosen to pick teams of 5 players each. There was a finish line drawn in the circle. The object of the game was to have as many of your team's players cross the finish line without having been knocked out of bounds. You had to go around the circle 3 times before the game, and its result was considered final. When we had enough kids, they served as referees if they were not playing. They would make the calls as to whether or not a player was legitimately knocked out of bounds. Also, you must take into consideration that due to the lack of parking, automobiles usually were parked on both sides of the street. The reason we usually played in the middle of the day was because there were less parked cars. The game was frowned upon by our parents because of the obvious dangers and injuries it represented, especially when you considered the takeout lanes. Anyway, we were in the midst of the game when Neil entered a cutout lane to take out Butchie. However, Neil was unsuccessful because he slipped in the middle of the street and fell on his back. At the same time this was happening, we did not notice a car roaring down the street. I will never forget that when we did notice the car, we were all able to get safely to the side of the street, and that is everyone except Neil. Neil was still lying in the middle of the street on his back, and we were yelling at him to get out of there. Unfortunately, there was not enough time for Neil to do this. I remember being on the side of the street, laying on my stomach and watching Neil sit up and then immediately lay back down. What happened next was simply unbelievable. I don't know if the driver of the car was drunk or simply crazy, but he had no intention of slowing down. As I lay on my stomach on the side of the street, I could not only feel, but also hear my heart pounding. I just knew Neil was going to die that day. However, from my vantage point, I watched the car's undercarriage pass over Neil, clearing his body by no more than 2 inches. The car continued to speed down the street, and we all looked at Neil in complete shock and amazement as he sat back up completely unharmed. You can call it anything you want, but I'll call it a miracle. I can remember looking at Neil when he first sat back up, and as the saying goes, he was white as a ghost. Needless to say, Neil told us all that he would never play the game again. He went home and told his parents about what had happened, and after that, we could never put together enough kids to play street derby again. It still amazes me to this day that it was literally quick thinking and a matter of inches that saved Neil's life. Sometimes I wonder if that was actually a matter of destiny.